What is going on, folks? I am Evil Viking 13. This will be the final part of my WarZ First Impression series, but I will have one more video after this that will feature some team play with myself and Joel of the DayZ Survivor Diaries series. I've put about 16 hours into the WarZ Alpha since my last video, and here are my final thoughts. At its best, the WarZ is a decent multiplayer zombie shooter with a number of player-friendly features like an easy-to-use inventory system and shooting mechanics that should be pretty easy for any FPS player to pick up. At its worst, the WarZ is an unashamed attempt to cash in on the surprise success of DayZ that really fails to innovate in, well, a lot of areas despite having every opportunity to do so. Some of you might say that's a bit harsh, but I like to break it down for you. I'm going to start by talking about what I think they actually got right and what I actually enjoyed about the game. Let's talk about the setting of Colorado first. I think that the setting is actually the best feature about the game. It feels right, it fits really well for a zombie apocalypse. It kind of feels like you're playing a Walking Dead MMO, and the graphics, while not really exceptional, even in alpha, are decent and do the job. There's also a kind of neat variety to the loot. For instance, the food category alone has a lot of different options that you can find, like oatmeal, bags of chips, tins of ham, chocolate bars. It's kind of cool to see some different options as you're running around looting. As far as game functionality goes, there are some neat things to talk about with the character creation system. It's kind of limited at the moment, but it looks promising, and the ability to customize your character is always welcome. I did like the inventory system in the WarZ. It works well, it's very easy to pick up. You don't have to watch a tutorial or try to figure it out too much, it's just there and it works. I thought that the ability to have multiple characters per account was pretty neat. That way you could have a neutral character, a bandit character, a hero character, and roleplay for that night depending on just how you were feeling. And the server browser works pretty well. It's fast and it functions, and you can get in and out of servers pretty quickly. Other things that I liked include the lighting effects, like the flashlights. Those look pretty cool, especially from a distance. I like the amount of clothing options that you have, all kinds of hats and eyewear and masks and stuff like that. It gives you more control over your survivor's appearance, and running into more unique looking survivors is always really cool. So, now that I've talked about what I liked about the game, let's talk about the issues that I have with the game. First of all, in my opinion, the marketplace is the worst design decision that they've made with this game. A survival game has no place for a marketplace where you spend either real or fictional money on any kind of get-ahead gear. I don't care if it's a packet of food, or it's a flashlight, or a gun. It's just far too easy and breaks the fourth wall, takes you completely out of the immersion, and really messes with the flow of the game. As an example, at one point while I was testing the game, my character was starving, I couldn't find food anywhere, so I trucked back to a safe zone, logged out, logged into the marketplace, spent a little bit of my in-game coin on a meal ready to eat, logged back in, ate it, and I was at full health bar again. How is that fun? This is just another way for the developers to monetize the game, and in my opinion, it's completely out of place. If the developers wanted to add some sort of marketplace to a survival game, it needs to actually take place within the game, not in an artificial safe zone, and not in the game's menus. It needs to be an actual location that could possibly be threatened sometimes. It should not be a totally safe way to get supplies. Speaking of safe zones, I'm not a big fan of those either. They feel very artificial, very forced, and in the end they end up being camping zones for bandits anyway. Instead of having these zones to access global inventory, players should have the ability to dig stashes and create campsites instead. This would also mean that your loot isn't magically protected inside of a global inventory, and you would even lose your loot sometimes. And that's okay, it's a survival game. And then there's the walk speed. And believe me, this is a huge issue that really ruins the whole feeling of the game right from the start. Your character moves painfully slow, and I really have no idea why. I mean, maybe it was used to make the map feel bigger. It just sucks all of the enjoyment out of scouting, exploring, and looting, which is the main part of the game. Your character moves just so slow, and crawling is even worse. There's also a lot of issues with the sound right now too. Gun sounds are pretty good, they're loud, but they're kind of flat and tinny. But the main problem is, sound does not travel realistically. It can be really hard to pinpoint gunshots, and after an apparently hard distance amount, gunshots actually aren't rendered at all, so you'll never hear them. And I know this is still alpha, but on a side note, Player emotes, voices, grunts, that sort of thing, and zombie sounds are pretty terrible. Now, we talked about the graphics earlier, but let's talk a little bit more about the level design and the environment. The world feels really gamey and not like a real place. Towns are very empty, and these weird artificial rock cliffs block players from going where the developers don't want you to go. There's also some really strange scale issues where player characters are absolutely tiny, and world objects like RVs, trees, and doorways are massive in comparison. You'll see that in the video with me and Joel where I have him stand outside of an RV and his head barely goes to the top of the tire on the thing. Animation in the WarZ ranges from acceptable to downright horrible. Animations like the crawling animation and the jumping animation just make me laugh every time I see them, and are honestly just distracting. Next, I'd like to talk about the ballistic setup and the movement system. While the FPS style movement setup and gun mechanics do feel nice at first, aiming and shooting is just far too easy and far too fast. All of the guns in the game, even the pistols, are very accurate, and they appear to have almost no recoil at all. Guns can be switched almost instantly, and because of that, combat ends up feeling very flat and arcade-like. Speaking of combat, the health system is also way too forgiving. Very common loot like painkillers and antibiotics, they instantly restore your health and can be taken in less than a second, even if you're right in the middle of a firefight, which can end up with a hilarious scenario where you get ambushed and you duck behind a tree, chug a few bottles of painkillers, and pop back out to fight back with full health. What's the point of that? As a lot of you pointed out on my last video, the health system also means that you don't actually ever starve to death. If you're ever out of food, just keep using bandages on yourself, and you'll just keep healing yourself back to full health. No food required. The map also feels kind of small. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of rock walls that prevent you from going to a lot of different places, so you end up having to take the same paths every time. And there's a lot of empty wasteland area where even the forests aren't very thick and interesting to look at. I also really dislike that you start with a map that also shows your exact location at all times. Sure, that's great for new players, but it really ruins a lot of that survivalist feeling. To wrap up my list of issues that I'm having with the game, here's a couple of just random things that may be fixed as the game exits alpha, but right now they are issues. There's the lack of vehicles. The developers have promised that they're coming, but we haven't really seen anything about vehicles at all at this point, and a game like this really needs vehicles to have a good end game. As I mentioned earlier, there's also the issue of the map size. It needs to be larger to support more than 40 players. And there's also that issue, the player count. The developer has talked about, I've heard of even 150 players, but there's no sign of that functionality at all at this point. And finally, I really just have to mention the hacking. At the moment, hacking is rampant in the WarZ. I've heard numbers from anywhere from 30 to 50% of the players that are in-game right now are hacking. These hacks are apparently everywhere. Every single server that you go into, someone's talking about a hacker somewhere. They're glitching through walls, they're speed hacking, they have unlimited ammo, they have God mode, and as far as I can tell, there is no concrete anti-cheat in the WarZ yet. The developers have promised that that's being worked on, but that is something that you guys do need to be aware of right now. So, there you have it, a pretty complete list of the pros and cons of the WarZ. So what's my conclusion? For me, personally, the WarZ would be worth buying only if it were the only game of its kind. However, it's not. Given its large amount of issues, I can really only recommend the WarZ to players that maybe found DayZ too hardcore, too difficult, or if you're waiting for standalone and you're impatient. And even then, I'd only pick up the WarZ if you can get it for the $10 or $15 that it has been on sale for occasionally. For me, personally, I want a fuller, more hardcore experience, so I'm going to be waiting for a DayZ standalone, and I honestly don't see myself playing the WarZ again. I did have some fun with it, but between the temporary alpha issues, the hacking, the glitching, as well as the larger game design issues like the marketplace, the map size, the ballistics, I just don't see myself being able to really enjoy this game. But that is just my opinion, and I hope this review has been helpful for you. I hope you've gotten a good look at the game if you haven't had a chance to try it for yourself. If you have your own opinion, which I'm sure some of you guys do, feel free to toss a comment down below. I'd love to see what you all have to say about it. And thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Don't forget to watch for the video of Joel and I doing some team play in the WarZ. That should be coming up right after this video. And that will be, as far as I'm planning right now, my last WarZ video. See you guys on the next one.